Hello, everyone. I am beyond thrilled today to host Dr. Anthony Chaffee, world-renowned speaker, YouTuber, and Australian-based carnivore. With a deep penchant for healing and transforming lives, Dr. Chaffee literally performs brain surgery as a practicing neurosurgeon by day and advocates for a healthy carnivore lifestyle as a podcaster by night. Prior to medical school and podcasting as an elite athlete, Dr. Chaffee played rugby for over 10 years, All-American for University of Washington, and then professionally in England, United States, and in Canada. So athlete, surgeon, podcaster, speaker, all come together as Dr. Anthony Chaffee focuses on optimizing performance and health as the plant-free MD. You are not going to want to miss this episode. I promise it will be amazing and mind-blowing. All right, let's get to it. Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Charging Up Leadership. I am your host, Heidi Frye, and this podcast is all about energizing you from the inside out with the mission of inspiring leaders to plug in, light up, and just be. Welcome, Dr. Anthony Chaffee. I am super excited to have you here this morning. Fantastic. Well, you just got off a consult, right?
Yeah, so it's 8:30 at night for me. But yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to dive in. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's do this.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
I would like to start at the beginning. So I always like the drama, right? So I'm picturing you sitting in an oncology class, right? In medical school. You're sitting there with your buds, you're listening intently. And this guy, was he a physician, by the way?
So this was actually my undergraduate degree, and it was a class of cancer biology. It was like a 400 level biology class. And I was obviously interested in going to medical school. I was pre-med, and I was at the University of Washington at the time. And I just thought it was a cool sounding class. So I wanted to know more about cancer biology. And so I went and took that class, and that was sort of a culminating moment for me, certainly a major moment in my life. I'd already set the stage. So I'd already taken biology and botany, and I knew about plant toxins and that's how they defend themselves. This is why the vast majority of plants are inedible. But then it didn't really sink in that, well, maybe the other plants that we eat, have something to say for themselves as well. And the fact that plants and animals are an evolutionary arms race, plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, so they can survive and thrive, and that's why they're not extinct. And then animals become more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants, so they can eat that plant specifically and survive and thrive, and that's their evolutionary niche. And you learn all this, and then you immediately go home and get told to eat your vegetables. And it's a complete disconnect, and you don't even think, oh yes, that applies to me. This is a real world piece of information that I learned and should be applied. And no one does. This is this whole separate universe. Oh, that's in a book. That's it's fiction. And or that applies to other people. That's something that happens, to somebody else. But we were learning this from a cancer perspective. So we went back over the fact that plants have these defense chemicals, and also learned that some of these defense chemicals can cause harm, metabolic disruption, cellular distress, and that can eventually precipitate into cancer. So it's a carcinogen. Long before anything becomes cancer, or even if it never becomes cancer, it's causing damage and metabolic harm and distress and cellular dysfunction. People can smoke for 50 years and not get cancer. Does that mean that they escape scot-free? No, of course not. They have a lot of damage. So these potential carcinogens are causing harm the whole time, and that's important. But looking at it just from a cancer perspective. And so we were looking at numbers of carcinogens. And so we learned Brussels sprouts alone had 136 carcinogens back in 2000.
Wait. Brussels sprouts, just Brussels sprouts, have how many?
Well, in 2000 or thereabouts, it was 2000, 2001. I forget the exact year that I was in that class. 136 individual carcinogens.
Oh my gosh. Oh my
That's
gosh.
what we were taught. Yeah.
Well, and
And
so go ahead. I'm sorry, continue.
oh no, I was just going to say, other plants are the same. So, mushrooms would have over 100, but all the other vegetables, fruits and vegetables and produce items that we would eat on a regular basis as a mainstay of our diet, like spinach and broccoli and kale and all these other sorts of things, celery,
Hmm.
they all dozens and dozens, if not over 100 as well. So this was commonality. This wasn't an exception.
Hmm. Hmm. So your mind was blown as
Mm,
well, in the specific sentence you heard your professor say was,
yeah. Well, that was the thing. So we were all very taken aback by that. We're all very shocked, and he went into other information about showing how much there was there and how toxic it was and all that sort of stuff. And so we were just absolutely gobsmacked. And I remember we're all just looking around wildly
right,
to see
right.
who joke. And looking for like a TA sitting in the corner laughing. Oh, he always does this. No. And eventually we all sort of settled down and realized, okay, this guy's serious. And I remember thinking inside my head, well, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And I feel like he read my mind because no one said anything, but he just looked at all of us.
Hmm.
And he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. I was like, right, no more plants. And I went to the grocery store after class and I was just in a daze. And I was just walking around going like, but everything's plants. There's plants everywhere. Everything has plants in it. And I came across some eggs. I was like, what the hell do I eat? I was like, eggs, okay. Plants
Right.
and eggs. And I went by the meat aisle. It was, the only place I ever wanted to shop anyway. And I was
Hmm.
like, okay, meat, I can get some meat. And I just got eggs and meat. And that was it. And that's what I ate for 3 years. And I've never felt better in my entire life, except for right now when I'm doing it again.
Hmm.
So I was playing high level rugby. I was in college. I was in class from the morning until 3 p.m. I was in training from 3 p.m., 3:30 to 10 p.m. basically every day. And
Right.
then have games on the weekends, anywhere from 3 to 4 games a weekend. I just love playing. So I just want to play as many games as I could possibly get in.
Sure.
And so I played for University of Washington. I played for Seattle Saracen. I play in the seconds that I play for both teams. So, I just love to play. And so I was getting a lot of action. I was getting a lot of playing time, and I was working out a lot, and I just felt amazing. And the more I did, the better I felt, and the more I could do. And I literally felt like a different breed of human. I felt, and in a lot of ways, I was because my body was working in ways that other people simply weren't.
Hmm.
And so I remember when I was 25, I was playing professionally in England rugby, and I sort of slipped off, and some of the bread, the meat was breaded or had some little crumbs on it, and the meat, I had a bit of a difficult time with the meat in England. I don't know what was going on. I got the impression that some of the meat that I was getting was sort of injected with water because I could not get it to brown. It would just turn gray and it would just cook right through gray and never go brown. It was just sort of sweaty and water was coming out of it. So I was just really annoyed by that. And so
It's so gross.
yeah, it was totally gross. And so this is like the only thing that I like eating, the only thing that I do eat. And now all of a sudden it's just tasting horrible. And so I ended up getting ready-made things, and like some of the chickens just sometimes were just crumbed.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, well, is this really that bad? Dose makes the poison. All the same arguments right now that vegans are making or whatever. It's like, well, dose makes the poison. It's probably not all that bad. Well, I made that same argument to myself. And it was silly then, it's silly now because just having some crumbed chicken a couple times a week, not even every day. Within a couple of months, I was sore, I was achy, I was getting tired, and I was like, why don't I feel as just superhuman amazing as I normally do? Am
Mhm.
I pushing myself? Am I not working as hard? I'm 25 now. Is that I'm just over the hill? I'm just dying now. My body's just decaying. And I didn't know what it was, but you look back, that's what it was. That was the difference. And the main difference was that I started slipping off of the diet. I started, instead of looking at all plants saying, absolutely not, I'm not touching that, I started thinking, well, that's not all that bad. Okay. And just things are slipping in without me even realizing it. And then, fairly soon, I was back eating just a pretty normal home cooked meat heavy
Yeah.
diet. Felt dramatically different. I was just a different person.
Mm.
And it wasn't until 6 years ago that I figured that out and went, no, humans actually are carnivores. This is the kind of animal that we are. That's our biological design. And that's how I was eating. And that's why I felt so amazing, was because I was eating what we're supposed to eat. And lions are going to feel better eating gazelle. And zebras are going to be better eating grass. Whales are going to feel better eating whatever that specific species of whale eats. So we are going to feel better and optimized by eating our optimal diet. And I was like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And at 38, I went back on a carnivore diet. And within 2 weeks, I just felt superhuman. It was absolutely, it was night and day how I felt. At 8 years old, I now felt like I was 22. I was overweight. I was out of shape. I had just come back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh, working in the refugee camps there with the Rohingya refugees from Burma. And I had not played a full season of rugby in 3 years. I was completely out of shape and felt horrible at the time. And then 2 weeks on a carnivore diet, and I felt like I was 22 again. I lost 23 pounds in 10 days, and all the out of my body. Yeah, it was insane.
Well, it's inflammation, right?
Well, there's inflammation, there's water weight, but there's also fat. And the thing is that, it's not just carbohydrates that can derange our hormonal signals. So I was already not eating carbohydrates because I just noticed it gave me a lot of back pain. And so, okay, I'm just not going to eat carbs. And so I was just eating greens and lean meat, and I was limiting it. And so just dropping the greens, just eating spinach, kale, broccoli, and of it, and then very limited amounts of meat, lean meat, feeling horrible, always hungry, didn't feel like I could, perform or work out well, and didn't feel ready to go back to rugby. And then I just dropped the greens and I started massively increasing the amount of meat I was eating, just eating until I was full, eating as much as my body told me to, of fatty, high fat ribeye. And sometimes I'd melt butter into it. And I felt great. And eating 5 times the amount of calories as I was before, I lost 23 pounds in 10 days. And I just, completely transformed my body. And all of a sudden in 2 weeks, I'm still out of shape. I'm still overweight, but I felt amazing. I'm like, right, time to go play some rugby. And I felt great. And I felt like I was 22. I could go as hard as I wanted to, and I wouldn't run out of gas. I could push myself and push myself and push myself. My body kept giving me more, even though I was out of shape. And so I felt amazing. And so I kept up with everybody who had been there training the whole season that I was gone.
Yeah.
And then just felt fantastic. And even when we did what's called a modified bleep test, which is like a fitness test, I ended up coming in sort of top 5 or 10 out of 92 people who had all been working their ass off and were half my age. And like it was not I didn't actually even like push myself that hard. Like I could have really tried to kill myself and gotten that, but I was just like, this is good. It's fine. So it was amazing. It's absolutely amazing what it does to you. Just simple dietary changes. And people ask me, during the lockdowns and everything, how do you work out? How do you stay in such good shape? I'm like, I've done push-ups twice in the last 3 months. Oh, whatever, you're lying. But it's like, no, this is 100% diet. This is just what your body is supposed to do and what it's supposed to look like.
Right.
If you're eating what it's supposed to eat, just like animals in the zoo eating their natural diet, they live in a box the size of a room. And that's the definition of a sedentary lifestyle. Yet they're not fat. They're not out of shape. They're ripped. They look like they're on steroids because they're supposed to eat. And so this is what a human in captivity looks like. If I work out, I get in better shape. But if I don't work, I never get out of shape. If that makes sense. This is as bad as it gets.
Yeah.
And so, I'm okay with that. But it's also nice.
So bad, so good. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I did hear Al on an interview, and she said he doesn't work out that much, and I was like, oh, she must not see him work out. That's all it is. So that makes total sense. Well, that is super interesting because I think I told you, I mean, I got rid of migraines myself. I got off all the drugs, which was awesome. I mean, when I was in my teens, I had 3 spinal taps, a pneumoencephalogram. I had angiograms. It was crazy. And then they said, well, we don't know what it is, so go see a psychiatrist, right?
Mm,
Put me on,
mm,
yeah, and put me on all kinds of drugs. And when I was 21 or 22, I read an awesome book called Control Your Migraine. It was a doctor who had migraines himself and an MD, and he advocated for food change. Now he was talking about nitrates and preservatives, but that's when I started cleaning up my, my intake. However, I would always go back to greens because they were, healthy. So greens, everyone knows I eat greens and I eat protein. And it wasn't until your show a couple weeks ago, Sally Norton was on your show and you were talking to her about oxalates. I almost
mm,
fell over. It was
mm.
this amazing puzzle piece moment. And I'm back on carnivore. So
Yay.
yeah, it's
Yay.
craziness.
How are
So
the headaches?
I'm sorry.
How are the headaches?
Oh, I got rid of those quite a few years ago. Yeah,
Oh,
from cleaning up the diet. Yeah, but then it was
good.
just I felt better, and like I don't
Yeah.
drink anymore. I haven't for years because those triggered headaches, and then it was like,
Mm,
do I really want to feel like crap in the morning? Nah,
yeah.
So I just stay off everything. So really not a big deal. Well, that is, I can only imagine what a life-changing moment that was in that class, and so.
Mm,
On this podcast, I talk about inspired action. I talk about, people who are leaders of themselves and do what they need to do to be the best version of themselves. And you embody that. So I've been a fan, not a super long time. But once I clicked in, I was all in. So it's been really super interesting, to listen to your story. Okay. So I have a
yeah.
couple questions, specifically about protein. Like right now, I have heard people say I can't find protein. I can't find whey protein. They're finding more and more plant-based junk. So, do you have a thought on that?
Well, I mean, if you're eating a proper diet, especially carnivore diet, you don't need to take protein supplements. You'll get a ton of protein, and not only that, will you get a lot of protein, you'll get the amount of protein that your body's asking you for. If you eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, if you listen to your body's signals, and you're taking in the amount of food and the quality of food and the character of food that your body's asking you for,
Mhm.
so the right amounts of protein and fat for your body will tell you will take the exact amount that it needs. I see this in the plant in the animal world. In any other animal, they eat to their body's design and to their nature, and it just works.
Right,
Nature has to work on its own.
right.
We didn't get placed here with a bunch of PTs and personal trainers and things like that, and and people with that took 2 nutrition classes at college and then said like, oh, this is what you have to do. It
Right.
had to work. You had to be able to listen to your signals and listen to your body and eat until something triggered you to say, I don't want to eat anymore. Lions eat, but they eat a specific amount. They don't just gorge themselves into their fat and rolling around and just puking. King lion as much as king lion wants,
Mhm.
and no one gets to touch that kill until he finishes what he wants. So it's called the lion's share. He eats as much as he wants of what he wants. And so they generally go for the fattiest part, like the stomach and fat around the organs and things like that. So that's what they go for. And at some point, before he's just laying there, just drooling and vomiting, he just goes, "Yep, that's enough. I don't want to eat anymore." And he stops, and then the rest of the lions get to come in. So we should have that same signal. Cows know at some point to just stop and then to use the cud. And you get these signals. If we didn't have these signals, we would not be here. We would not have survived. We would not have made it to the point of being able to develop the technology to then study this biochemically and then talk about it and get it all wrong,
Right.
right? So you should have natural instinctual tells in your body. And what I think that is taste. And so it tastes better the hungrier you are. And that's something that's been said for hundreds of years. The most the best spice is hunger. And so if you're eating and you're hungry, it will taste good. You'll get, a metaphorical pat on the head for bringing in something good. And if I say, oh, yes, we want that, eat that, contrast that with vegetables or, other sorts of things, coffee, how bitter that is. That's your brain saying, no, 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 there's something bad in there. We don't want that. Spit that out. So sugar is a bit of an outlier, but sugar is a drug. Sugar is addictive, and if the plant uses it to get you addictive, so you'll move its seeds. And it's also, we recognize it as safe, so it's not going to kill us that day. Give us a quick hit of energy. So that's an outlier on something that tastes good. But if it tastes bad, then you can pretty much trust that there's something bad in there. So if you're eating something good for you, it's also going to taste good. You're going to get a pat on the head. It's going to give you a good response, but it actually has negative feedback. So every bite that you take is slightly less good, slightly less tasty until the point that it doesn't taste good anymore. And so you'll notice you get the same big steak or piece of meat, and it's delicious at first, and you keep going. It's delicious, amazing. It's good. It's all right. It's okay. And you get to a point where you're just like, I'm really not enjoying this. I just sort of want to stop, and you just stop.
Yeah.
So that's how it should be. And if you're doing that, you'll get enough protein. You might have to eat more than once a day. Just listen to your body. If for some reason you don't trust your body, you don't trust, your trillions of cells working in harmony in biochemistry, micromanaging every single little physiological mechanism in your body. If you don't trust that, fine. You can try and get protein powders that just don't have the rest of the crap. There are a few brands out there. They're just whey protein or just beef isolate, and don't have anything. Definitely not get anything with any flavors or any artificial sweeteners or any normal sweeteners, just pure animal-based protein. But again, you really don't need it if you're eating naturally.
So I just want to make sure, in case we're not clear, you only eat meat.
That's correct.
Meat, eggs. You are.
Yeah, I think eggs are honorary meat. It's all the nutrients that are later going to turn into meat. So it's right up there.
So if anyone's curious, I saw a YouTube video of yours maybe 2 days ago about your Costco run and your refrigerator stash. And I was just, and then, you cutting up the meat. Oh my gosh, it was hilarious. So, you're only eating meat. Well, that's awesome. Well, I have a little thing. I'm thinking, maybe you could bust 10 myths in 10 minutes. What do you think?
Sure. Let's give it a go.
So often when I'm looking up myths and so on and so forth, people will say, they'll give the myth and then they'll say, this isn't true. They won't explain why. They won't give us any logic behind it, right? They just say, this isn't true. So just last week, I had a client here in my office, and I mentioned beef, and he said, well, what about the methane problem? That's 40%. And I was like, no, stop. We're gonna do this. So, all right, ready?
Yeah.
All right. 10 myths in 10 minutes. So the first one, myth number 1, human beings are obviously omnivores. I literally read that. Eating food of both plant and animal origin. Are we omnivores?
Well, it depends on how you define it. If the definition of an omnivore is you could eat plants, then that means that lions and hyenas and jackals are omnivores as well, because they could eat these things. Lions and cats can get up to 60% of their calories from carbohydrates. That doesn't mean that they're omnivores. They're actually obligate carnivores. So I think that a better definition is, what are you optimized by eating? Are we optimized? And so an optimal omnivore would be optimized by one of two things: either being optimized by eating either meat or plants, or optimized by having a combination of the two and having to have the two. We don't fit into any category. We are not optimized when we eat plants. We're actually detracted from when we eat plants. We can eat them to survive, and that's good, right? Survival is optimal, but that's not optimal for our health and development. And so there is nothing in plants that we need that we cannot get from meat. But there are many things in meat that we have to have that we cannot get from plants. So that's complete nutrition is fatty meat. You don't need any plants. So we are optimized by eating meat. And so it really just depends on how you define your terms. You know, we could get essential nutrients like copper and iron and magnesium and zinc from eating dirt, right? That doesn't mean that we're dirtivores, right? And we can get calories that you have to have. You die without them from
Right.
drinking Coca-Cola. So can we eat dirt and drink Coke and that's food to us? No, food is species specific. Food belongs to the species. So food to a lion is different than food to a giraffe or a gazelle or other species. So we have a specific species specific diet, and we need to recognize what that is biologically. And for us, we are optimized by meat. That's what we've been eating for millions of years. There's not a single vegetable or plant that we're eating now that even existed in the last ice age. Most likely, maybe they did, but it would be a distant remnant relative that we've then hybridized and bred from. We don't eat plants that even existed 50,000 years ago. So how could we have adapted to them?
Fair, fair. Okay, thank you. Myth number 2, fat makes you fat. Saturating fat clogs arteries. Go.
Oh, that's a twofer.
I know,
So,
I know, I know.
yeah, that's okay. So, putting on weight is has much more to do with hormones than anything else. You're eating carbohydrates that raises insulin. Insulin blocks leptin. Insulin forces energy into cells, doesn't allow it to come out of cells. Insulin is the fat storage hormone. Also a carb storage hormone, a protein storage hormone. It is a storage hormone. You need it. You have to have it. But you have too much and you'll overstore things. And so, this is why we have people with tumors, they secrete too much insulin, they gain a lot of weight. They become very overweight and obese. And so, we know that. So this is hormonal. So you can eat the same amount of calories, which is a very poor metric, but, let's use it for now. And you can eat, 2,000 calories of a normal diet with carbs and rice or whatever. And you can eat, the same 2,000 calories of a ketogenic diet, and you will actually lose weight because hormonally your body is working different biochemically. And it's actually been shown that if you just stop eating carbohydrates and your insulin levels go down, you will increase your basal metabolic rate by 350 kilocalories a day. You'll burn more calories throughout the day. And so, that increases your metabolism. When your insulin is down, your metabolism is up. So saturated fat does not do that. Saturated fat does not increase insulin. It does not cause that hormonal changes. Also, something was pointed out by someone who I quite admire, Dr. Michael Eads, at a conference that we both spoke at in San Diego a few months ago, Symposium for Metabolic Health. He talked about a different way of looking at weight loss. Calories don't weigh anything. That's a measure of heat energy, right? So if you have a glass of water and it's room temperature and then you heat it up, it doesn't weigh more. It has more calories. Ooh, it weighs more. That's not how it works. We're not combustion engines. We're chemical factories. And what weighs anything? Matter, right? And so calories don't. Energy breaking bonds, from ATP, that does not weigh anything. The atoms weigh something. So how do you lose weight? Where does it go? Heat escapes? No, that doesn't weigh anything. Atoms leave your body, right? So how would you want to avoid putting on weight? Don't put as so many atoms in your body. Well, fat has 9 kilocalories per gram of fat. And protein and carbs have only 4 kilocalories per gram of fat. So really, they have like 2.2 grams per 9 calories, right? So you have to take in over twice the amount of matter into your body to get the same amount of energy, right? So what's a better way of reducing the amount of matter that you have in your body? Eat a lot of fat. And as saturated fat causing heart disease, it never did in the first place. That was a myth. That was a scapegoat that was put forward by the sugar companies, that documented in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016 with actual internal memos from the sugar companies detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it's more likely sugar. And there's a lot of studies showing a strong correlation between sugar consumption and heart disease. One of those professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease. And this goes, Ansel Keys was one of these bought and paid for guys, not one of the ones from Harvard. He was from Minnesota. But the list goes on. There are many of these instances, and this is all documented and published in the peer-reviewed literature. So that was never a problem. The Journal of the American College of Cardiology published a major paper in 2020, going through all the randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses, all the level 1 evidence on saturated fat and heart disease, and they found no correlation at all between saturated fat consumption and cardiovascular disease. In fact, they found an inverse relationship between saturated fat consumption and stroke rate. So the more saturated fat people ate in randomized controlled trials, the less strokes they had. The less saturated fat they ate, the more strokes they had. So this is a complete farce. We've been lied to, and that's documented. We know this. That's a fact. That's a matter of historical record. This is not even up for debate anymore.
Why aren't we waking up?
Well, a lot of people are. A lot of doctors are. A lot of cardiologists are. A lot of people are seeing this going like, wow, that was a huge con.
Yeah.
And there's so many examples of this. And we know this. People are motivated to push forward their own narratives, their own ideologies, and their own products. And so a lot of these things are coming from very, very wealthy corporations that have a vested interest in protecting their product, and they have trillions to play with. The sugar industry makes about $1.4 trillion a year, and the medical industry makes about doesn't make, but we spend about $2.4 trillion just treating the ill effects of sugar consumption, not anything else. So this is a multi-trillion-dollar operation. This is the entire federal budget of the United States, and they are going to fight tooth and nail before they get.
Of course. Well, we'll come back to this topic possibly. Let's keep going here. There, in carnivore, there are no health benefits. I know, I literally saw that as a myth. I was like, that doesn't even make sense. I mean, I can even answer this to some degree. I've heard dentists. I've heard there's the one gal, she calls herself Carnivore Doctor. She's is she a ophthalmologist and they talk about how they see disease being reversed. I'm sure you've seen the same thing.
Absolutely. As Dr. Gary Fettke said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You put someone on this diet and diabetes goes away. He was doing diabetic foot amputations, and all of a sudden he put them on this diet. All of a sudden they don't need an amputation anymore. They reverse their diabetes. They reverse their vascular diseases, replacing joints. And he says, okay, I'll replace your joint. I'll put you on the list for surgery in 3 months. But first you need to go on this diet to get ready for surgery. Do it 2 months later, they call and say, hey, doc, I don't think I need surgery anymore. My shoulder's fine.
Wow.
And so, this and autoimmune diseases, they just go away. Autoimmune, from what I can tell, happen from eating the wrong thing, causing leaky gut. Those things these defense molecules and defense chemicals from plants get into your body. Also, bacteria can now get into your body. Your body attacks these things, makes antibodies towards them, and then people with through molecular mimicry, with similar antigens on their cells, there's cross reaction. And we used to think that molecular mimicry used to sensitize you to your own body, but I don't think that's the case, because when you stop eating these things, those antibodies go down, and you can measure that. And I do in the clinic. And so I see people with autoimmune issues. You go on a carnivore diet, red meat and water works best for them because it's chicken and fish. They're not being fed what they're supposed to eat. Wild caught fish, usually fine, but they do amazingly well. And that's actually in the literature as well for Crohn's disease. So people put on an elemental diet, which is just basic nutrients, nothing else, is a better treatment for an acute flare-up of Crohn's than prednisone, which is a steroid that's a gold standard. So just not eating the wrong thing is a better treatment than steroids, okay? So that means the food is causing the disease. So of course carnivore helps disease. Of course carnivore improves health, because you're eating what you're optimized to eat. You're not eating these things that cause harm. You're only eating the things that provide health. So of course it provides benefits. That's insane.
Well, I know that, but
Well, but this is pure denial. I mean, that's the stage that we're getting to with the vegan crowd. It's pure denial.
Mm-hmm.
That can't be. Well, look, dude, you're really missing the boat here, and you're not paying attention. And at this point, it's willful. You're not seeing millions of people around the world dramatically rearrange their health. Oh yeah, but people are hurting themselves. Name one. I've asked these people all the time. It's like, show me one person who has hurt themselves doing this.
Yeah, right,
There are
right.
people that don't stick with it
Mhm.
because for one reason or another they don't like it. But every single person that I've spoken to and tried to help with this, even there's teething issues, there's things that can come up.
Yeah.
There's always a workaround. I have yet to find someone that I can work with that hasn't been able to do this and meet with great success. I've yet to see anybody who could do that. So, people may give up and they may stop before, they resolve their problems,
Right.
but that doesn't mean that it caused any harm, because and it certainly doesn't mean that on the aggregate, this is not helping people. That's insane.
Well, and like I said, there's so many videos, YouTubes out there that declare
Yeah.
otherwise. So this next one is kind of the other side of the same coin. Number 4, nutritionally deficient is not healthy, right? So the nutritionally deficient part, I saw, who was it? It was one of one of the people you talk about. It wasn't Saladino. It was, I don't remember his name, but there was a chart showing the nutritional value. I'll let you speak to that.
Okay. So, well, I mean, Judy Cho does a lot on that, showing all the different nutrients are in there. Dr. Baker does as well. Dr. Chaffee, does too. He actually just put out a podcast talking about all the different, beneficial nutrients that only exist in meat and cannot get from plants. So I agree. A nutritionally deficient diet is bad, which is why you shouldn't be a vegan, right? You have to eat meat. Like, there are essential nutrients that simply don't exist in plants, and they never will. And so, well, unless you bioengineer them to, but whatever. Even if you get all the nutrients you want, you get the bad with the good. You get all these defense chemicals. It's very easy. The Inuit exist.
Mm-hmm.
They live in the North Pole. So you have all these native populations, like the Native Australians, like the Native Americans, the 1800s, who were only eating bison. And there was a study out in 2001 that showed that the Native Americans in the 1800s, in the plains of America, in the Great Plains, they were the tallest human beings on Earth. Right now, they are not so. Right now, they're much shorter than that. So they have lost their height, and that happened exactly at agriculture as well, 10,000 years ago, with the fossil record.
Right.
You immediately 10,000 years ago, the fossils lost 5 inches in height, brains shrunk by 11%, and they had all these signs all throughout the body of malnutrition and damage, wound healing. Exact same things happened to the Native Americans. That exact same things happened to the Native Australians. But either way, they were just eating meat. There's plenty of records going back hundreds of years saying these guys just eat meat. This is crazy. People, oh yeah, but I bet they were doing this. And you can find anybody who says anything silly. And just because they knew which plants they could eat if they were starving, because again, does that make us an omnivore just because we can survive on something?
Right.
No, it makes us a robust species that can weather famine much better. So that's a survival mechanism. That doesn't mean that's optimal. And so they knew which plants that they could eat medicinally or for survival purposes. But when they had meat, they just ate meat.
Right.
And but people will deny that and they'll claim whatever. But you can't do that with the Inuit, because they live in the North Damn Pole and there are no plants up there. They say, oh, well, they eat the stomach of the caribou. Most of them don't eat caribou. They eat polar bear, they eat seal, they eat whales, all of which are carnivores.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually funny. There's a guy who actually I quite like and I have much respect for, Dr. David Sinclair from Harvard, about longevity, but he talks about the carnivore diet. He talks about, oh, we should be doing Mediterranean. Unfortunately, he's just under the influence of Harvard, which is pushed by Dr. Walter Willett, who has strong ties with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who are religiously anti-meat, and they are multi-trillionaires. They own a lot of different multinational plant-based processed food companies. They founded Kellogg's, they founded Sanitarian Foods, they founded 20 other cereal companies. And they push this whole plant-based narrative because they are religiously anti-meat. And so unfortunately, he's just sort of in that sphere of influence. And so you talk, well, maybe carnivore gives you good health, but maybe just burns you out too quickly. And so do you want to be that? Do you want to be a lion just running out and just living 12 years and then dying? Or do you want to be a whale that lives this long, slow life? Can someone please get a memo to him, so I don't have his email, and let him know that really every single whale on Earth is a carnivore. Great analogy. So the point is, you eat what you're designed to eat, you're going to live as long as you're designed to live. And we know that genetically humans are designed to live 120 years.
Yeah.
And if you eat what you're designed to eat, you should live 120 years. So right off the bat, I'm going to beat David Sinclair on the longevity tip. Doesn't matter what pills and medications and genetic variants decides to put on himself. I'm going to make it to 120, 130, just the way I am. And if he's smart, he'll hop onto that and realize that 120 is the baseline, and all of his research can actually put us up from there, and that'd be great. But right now he's working on a 78-year baseline. Like he's already 50 years short, right? So we have so much ground to gain just by eating optimally. You don't even need to go to the metformins and the rapamycins and all these other sorts of things. You'll get another 50 years of excellent health, and you won't be sick leading up to the point of death at 78. So, yeah, I think I went on 5 tangents there, so I apologize.
Okay.
But
We probably handled some of the other myths in there. So we already talked about this one, which is myth number 5, eating this way is unsustainable. I mean, you touched on it.
yeah. Well, again, so again, the Inuit, they wouldn't be alive. Go back to the ice ages. Yeah. There were plants available. What were the people eating when they crossed the land bridge from Asia to North America? There was nothing. And so, if it's not sustainable, if you can't do it, if it's lacking any vitamins or minerals, they're all dead. You can't just eke out survival in an ice age. Right. You either thrive or you go extinct. And we not only thrived, we became the most dominant species on Earth that has ever lived during the ice ages, right? We spanned the globe during the ice ages. So you can't do that unless you are the dominant species. And that is exactly what we are. And you can't be the most dominant species unless, when you're in a physical, before the technological revolution, you can't do that unless you are physically and intellectually dominant as well. And we were. And so that's what we were eating. And so obviously we were thriving doing that. And is it sustainable? Of course it is, because we exist. We made it through the ice ages. And in fact, we thrived, flourished, and dominated. All
righty. Number 6, it's a twofer also. So you don't have to go into too much detail, but it will wreck your kidneys / harm your thyroid. Those are 2 myths. I know.
But I don't know where they get the thyroid one from. That's just made up. But the kidney one at least has a basis in medical mythology, because that's again a myth. I've noticed that a good portion, maybe 60% of the things that I learned in medicine were just made up. They were best guesses, and I've seen this in real life. They're like, hey, we don't have a lot of information on this, but this is our best guess. So this is a guideline we would recommend because we don't really know where to go with this, right? And the problem is that those guidelines, those recommendations, they get enshrined, and then they get repeated and repeated and repeated, and they end up in textbooks, and people just start, oh yeah, this is what you do, right? What was it based on? It was based on a best guess. A lot of medicine is like that. Medicine is not a hard science. It's barely even a science. It barely even uses science. It's not a science. It's an art. It's a profession. And I wish it was a science, but my father was a physicist at the Lawrence Livermore Radiation Laboratory. I know what science looks like. This ain't it. And so it may use some scientific principles, but it's an art. It's an application. Yeah. And so, we need to remember that. And so many of these things are just best guesses. And that's what the kidney thing was. So it said, okay, well, you cleave off, if you're eating too much protein, that cleaves off a nitrogen group, that turns into ammonia, that turns into urea, and it's hard on your kidneys to get rid of that. That's an assumption. And not actually borne out by the studies. What the actual studies showed that the more protein you ate actually improved your kidney function. So the more protein, the better for your kidneys. And also plants have a lot of nephrotoxic chemicals such as oxalates, which you mentioned before. Yeah. And so 75% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate stones. So this damages your kidney. And so avoiding those plants with those nephrotoxic drugs or nephrotoxic toxins and eating more meat or more protein will actually improve kidney function. I've seen this. I've seen people with CKD4, so chronic kidney disease stage 4, reverse that and
Wow.
get normal kidney function back. This is happening all over the world. You go on any forum on a carnivore, Facebook group or anything like that, search for kidney disease, things like that. You will see that everybody improving this. The thyroid thing, I've literally never even heard that. The only loosely tenuous one is where, like, Dr. Saladino said that, I think it was him, other people that may have said this as well, but the being in ketosis for too long can damage some of your thyroid production. I've never seen that. I've never seen that in practice. I have a lot of, so I normally work in neurosurgery, but I also have a functional medicine practice because I like applying these sorts of things and getting people better and preventing them from getting sick in the first place, that preventative medicine sort of aspect. And I have a number of patients with thyroid issues, Hashimoto's, Graves, or just, or borderline hypothyroidism, just because of their life. They all improve their thyroid function, all of them. I've never seen anyone with thyroid dysfunction from long-term ketogenic diet. Sorry, a little friend popped up. Sorry. So I've never seen that in practice. I've never seen it clinically. I don't know how it would happen mechanistically. One thing I do know is that some people who have had some thyroid issue being on a long-term ketogenic diet, quite often they're the ones eating a lot of organs, tons of organs, like liver. Well, liver has a lot of vitamin A, vitamin A, so too high of vitamin A is well known and documented to cause depression of your thyroid stimulating hormone, and then bring about hypothyroidism.
Sure.
So that's something that can happen if you're having too much. But we have people that have been in ketosis. Native populations that have been around. The ice ages, all these sorts of things. Hypothyroidism is very dangerous. It's life threatening, and if it goes low. And congenital hypothyroidism is actually called cretinism, and this is a congenital developmental defect and growth deformity that happens in kids, has very specific facial deformities, and causes short stature and mental retardation. So it's very serious. And so if you have low thyroid, if mother has low thyroid, and if they're on a carnivore diet, I guess they're definitely going to have that. Their kids are all going to have cretinism. So that goes exactly one generation, and then everyone's dead. Because again, when you're in a ice age, and you only have meat to eat, and you can't thrive, you're going to die. So if you have an entire generation that comes on because they're only eating meat, so they all have thyroid disease, they all have thyroid dysfunction, all the women have thyroid dysfunction, so all the kids are having cretinism. Then you have an entire generation of kids with severe physical and mental handicaps. You're not making it past that generation. So we know that can't exist because we exist.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'm gonna combine number 7 and 8, because 7 you really don't need to address. It causes colon cancer. So it's the same, just a different part of the body. Number 8, you need to add fiber to poop in chronic constipation.
No, it's actually fat that drives digestion. You have a limited capacity to absorb fat with your bile, and when you run out of bile, you have a spillover effect. So they say, well, you don't want to eat too much fat. There's no such thing, I don't think, because you physically can't absorb it, right? So I think your body's making a random amount of bile to get a random amount of fat, and you need to micromanage your own biochemistry and physiology. I don't believe that. I think that's wrong. So I think your body's making that specifically because it wants a specific amount of fat in return. And so when you spill over that, it's really, really hard for your body to absorb. Maybe about 10% gets absorbed, most of the MCTs, the rest of it goes out. And so that's what keeps your stool soft. And so if you're getting constipated, it's because you're not eating enough fat. And this is why we had this large uprising in constipation in the 1980s. We said, stop eating fat. Everyone stopped eating fat. Right. Everyone got constipated. Oh, you got to eat fiber. I mean, I remember when that happened. I was a kid in California when I started seeing that on the TV. Doctors recommend eating more fiber. Why is it that we didn't need fiber as a species before 1986? I mean, where did that come from? If this was a requirement, we would have figured that out a long time ago. Just from that physical, like, oh, everyone's getting constipated. Well, that should have been a problem previously. but it wasn't. And the colon cancer thing, that's been thoroughly debunked by a paper out of University of Washington in Seattle last year before, where they looked over like 800 different studies looking at, and they couldn't even find a correlation between meat or processed meat, and especially not unprocessed red meat and colon cancer. That is a complete myth. That different vegan proponents and Seventh-day Adventist members that were on the WHO cherry picked. They had access to hundreds of studies, and they picked a couple dozen, and it was the one that fit their narrative and had very weak associations. And there was a gentleman on that panel that was against that, and he said it was the hardest thing he ever had to do professionally, because he saw them throw away hundreds of high-level pieces of high-level studies showing absolutely no correlation between processed meat, and certainly not red meat, and cancer of any form, colon or otherwise, and instead cherry pick these really poorly made, poorly designed studies that had a very weak association. And then he said, hey, you guys need to document your bias. You're all vegans, vegetarians, and Seventh-day Adventists. You have a bias against meat. You need to say that. And they refused. So, this is what it is. It's propaganda. It's a propaganda campaign, and we just need to understand that.
Okay. All right. 9. By the way, we're really not good at the 10 minutes part.
I know.
So good at just all the information. So I'm cool. I'm cool.
I could just go bullshit on each one, and I'd be the same thing as
everyone else. So that is why you're here. Okay, number 9, messes with the gut biome.
Okay, so that was really easy. The microbiomes of the Inuit, when they're eating their natural meat-only diet, has been found to be the healthiest microbiome on Earth. Mm-hmm. A friend, Dr. Sean O'Mara's from Minnesota, and he came to carnivore from another side. He studied visceral fat, and studied over 6,000 people doing MRIs, and found that visceral fat was directly related to metabolic disease, and that it was metabolically active, and you could actually reverse metabolic disease by eliminating visceral fat. He found the best way to do that was dietarily was a carnivore diet, and then exercise was sprinting and high intensity interval training and lifting weights. And so and he looks at the microbiome as well, and he does a carnivore diet. So he came to a carnivore diet because that was the best thing to remove visceral fat. So that's why the direction he came from. And so he's been doing that for 5 years. He has some sort of fermented things. That's the only thing. The only plants he'll ever eat is fermented ones that have a bit of fermentation, have that back, and he eats it for the bacteria. Mm-hmm. And so he gets that as well. And so he submitted his microbiome test as a carnivore with a bit of ferments, and you can do the same thing with fermented dairy, like live cultured yogurt. And he sent that in, and he actually got a call from like the president or CEO of the company that he sent it into, and they said, you have the best microbiome we have ever tested in our histories, in our company's history. What the hell do you do? So okay,
my gosh,
set up a meeting. And so he's a carnivore, right? And so your microbiome will be based on what you're eating. So if you're whatever you're eating, your microbiome is eating. And there are many dentists to show that your oral biome is much improved from eating this way as well. And so you can repopulate your gut biome. You take antibiotics, something like that. I think having some fermented dairy or something like that's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
And so but once it's established, what you're eating will perpetuate it. It's like prebiotics and probiotics. So the probiotics or the bacteria, prebiotics feed those bacteria. Right? Well, meat does the same thing. And so this we know from the Inuits. They just have the healthiest microbiome, and which stands to reason. If we're eating what we're designed to eat, our body should work the way it's designed to work. We should have the microbiome we're designed to work with, and we should be optimized from that standpoint as well.
Amen. All right. Mm-hmm. Number 10, and one of my favorites. Cows are killing the planet, and it's bad for the environment.
Okay, cows are the environment, right? I mean, there have been animals on the earth for how many hundreds of millions of years? Since why now are they a problem? Why is it right now that they're destroying the planet with their natural emissions? So if you had a grazing herd or whatever, if you just got rid of all the cows and just let that go back to nature, an animal sort of replaced it or whatever, the animals that replaced it on that same piece of land would have the exact same emissions.
Mm.
Right? There are no more cows now than there were 200 years ago. Why are they causing a problem now? You know, we had hundreds of millions of bison and hundreds of millions of more deer and antelope and all that sort of stuff throughout the Great Plains up until the 1800s, when we slaughtered them completely in order to cut off the food supply of the Native Americans so that we could win the war. And that was what Buffalo Bill said in these campaigns. It's like, just kill all the bison that you see. Every bison killed is an Indian dead. And that's what they said, right? So this is what it was. So they wiped out all of these things. And what happened? You know, the middle of America went from being the most fertile piece of land on earth nearabouts to the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, right? And that's from farming. That's from agriculture, from crop agriculture. That destroys the planet. That's not natural. Cows are natural. Animals are natural. They're supposed to be there. In fact, when you remove animals from an area, they turn to deserts. You know, plants and animals evolved together. The animals have to eat these things down and graze these things down, or else it actually destroys the ecology of the situation. Whereas if you're growing a specific crop, a monocrop, you necessarily have to destroy an entire ecosystem. You have to kill every plant and animal that's alive in that area. Just like in Borneo, they've destroyed 55% of the rainforest, killed all the orangutans and the snakes and the monkeys and the birds have all left, and brought up palm seed oil crops, right? And the vegans will justify this and say, oh, well, that's fine, because yes, you kill all these trees and all these orangutans and all that sort of stuff, but you know, they just planted plants. So, you know, same. No, it's not same. That's not an ecosystem, right? You've destroyed the ecosystem. And in fact, the Dust Bowl in America was brought about by by farming techniques. And so they were tilling the ground is really bad for the ground. You lose all this topsoil. Rain comes down, washes it away. Wind blows it away. We're getting these massive dust storms, losing tons of topsoil, and to the point that nothing could grow. This was the Dust Bowl, right? And then we figured out that was from farming in these ways. That's why you now have these curved scallop patterns instead of a road that's 6 miles long, right? And so that's harder for the rain and wind to wash this stuff away, but it still does. We still lose 27.5 billion tons of topsoil every year due to our farming practices. That's an area the size of Kentucky every single year. That is a vanishing resource that only grows at about a centimeter per 500 years. So that is a very, very, very scarce resource, and it's becoming more scarce by the day. People estimate that, I think it's like in 30 years or something like that, we're going to run out. We're not going to be able to, we have sort of like 50 more crop cycle rotations, and then that's it.
Well, and I saw this quote, and I know you referred to this. You know this quote already. Globally, cows and other livestock animals are responsible for about 40% of methane emissions, a potent greenhouse gas. In digesting their high-fiber diet, cows emit methane as a byproduct, making them one of the least climate-friendly sources of food on the planet. And I heard you, you're already laughing. I heard you talk about how those statistics were so, again, skewed, or, they were taken out of context or not even correctly measured.
No, and it is very much taken out of context. And they say all the water that they use as well, all this stuff is green water. It's rainwater that goes down into the ground and grows grass. So like, well, it takes all this grass to eat for these cows to eat. Therefore, that takes that water to grow that cow. That's dumb. You're not piping in and irrigating massive fields, and that's what they're comparing it to. It's like, oh wow, it takes all this water to irrigate a cow. We're not irrigating cows. Yeah. This is rainwater, right? And so, the methane, like where does methane come from? So the cows aren't necessarily really producing this. It's the bacteria in their gut that is breaking it down. So if that bacteria were on the fiber as it was breaking down, it's the same amount of methane is going to be produced as well. So it's a farce again. So, the greenhouse gases that humans produce is less than what all the volcanoes emit every year. And that's less than all of the vegetable matter, decaying leaves and all these downed trees and all this sort of stuff every year. And all of that combined is only 5% of the CO2 emissions that get kicked off every year. The rest come from the oceans because they heat up every couple hundred years. And as they heat up, they release more CO2, but it takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years for them to heat up. So basically, we're getting the heating from the medieval warm period. Now we're just starting to see the effects of that, or thereabouts. But there's professors from MIT and Harvard that go into this, saying that this is what's happening. This is from hundreds of years ago, and hundreds of years of this coming up. We're coming out of the Little Ice Age. What's going to happen when you come out of something called the Little Ice Age? It's gonna, unless you're going into the Big Ice Age, you're going to get warmer. So of course that's happening. And hundreds of years later, after the fact, the ocean level temperature levels are rising, and the CO2 is coming out. So we're talking about a fraction of what's actually coming out. You talk about methane. Okay, is that a potent greenhouse gas? According to whom? Because as Al Gore says, CO2, if you don't take into account water vapor, accounts for as much as 30% of the greenhouse effect. So that sounds like a pretty potent greenhouse gas, right? So methane is supposed to be more than that. I don't know exactly the figure. Is it 40, 50%? Everything else, 70% if you don't consider water vapor. Okay, let's consider water vapor for a second. Water vapor accounts for 92% of the greenhouse effect. So you can't not consider water vapor, right? So methane is a potent greenhouse gas. How? I mean, were we talking 3%, 4% of the total? Right. 92% is water vapor. So these are scare tactics, and these are people. This is part of the normal cycle. Animals eat fibrous plants. That's the whole point. We're being told to eat fibrous plants. Vegans make methane, right? You eat fiber that gets into your gut. Your gut makes methane.
Yeah.
That happens. So, it's not good if the cow does it, but it's good if we all do it. There's more people.
And then on top of that, why aren't we talking about all the vehicles? Come on. Right.
Yeah. Well, and again, all the vehicles, all the cows, everything that every human does doesn't even account for the greenhouse emissions from the volcanoes every year that happen naturally. And those aren't even close to the decaying vegetable matter that will happen no matter what. And that's not even considering all the animals all around the world eating fibrous plants and producing methane. This is a normal process. That methane is part of the life cycle, the ecological cycle. It's supposed to happen. You're recycling nutrients. So those chemicals go into the atmosphere, they get decayed, they turn into different things, and they get back into the plants, they get back into nature. The animals eat plants down, they defecate and urinate and burp and breathe. And this is recycling all these nutrients. Plants need CO2. We need oxygen. They produce oxygen from CO2. We produce CO2 from oxygen. It's a quid pro quo. And so when you start breaking that and you start messing with complex systems, you get very serious, dire consequences. It's the law of unintended consequences. And that's what we're facing now. Again, you need to go back to nature. When you go back to our nature, eat what we're naturally designed to eat, and that's how we're going to be optimized. You try to let the planet run the way it's supposed to be, and that includes animals. You have them in rangeland, going up and down, in and out of different areas. They're regenerating the land, they're returning nutrients to the soil, and they're helping the land and the ecology get better. When there were hundreds of millions of massive animals throughout the middle of America, it was, again, one of the most fertile areas in the world. The topsoil was something like 20 feet deep. The grass was 9 feet tall. There are explorers. I don't know if it's exactly 20 feet deep, but big, deep reserves of topsoil. And the explorers that went out west, they were saying that the grass was so tall they could tie it in knots over their horses' heads. This thing was like 9 feet tall, right? So, and this was with all these hundreds of millions of bison and large game that were going through, because it was exactly because there were hundreds of millions of large animals, grazing animals, that they could support that they made the ground more healthy, they made the land more fertile and healthy, and that was able to support more plants, which made it able to support more animals, which helped the plants, which helped the animals, which helped the plants, which helped the animals, and it just kept going like that, you're like hundreds of millions of these things. So, and they're being hunted all the time by 100 million Native Americans before a plague wiped out 95% of them. But there was a full carnivorous civilization that was just eating buffalo and wild game, and they had a city in what is now St. Louis that was estimated to be able to hold 1 million full-time residents. Right, so this is a city based on not hunter-gatherer, hunter lifestyle, so not civilization. You didn't need crops; they just needed access to a lot of meat, and they had access to a lot of meat. And so, and yet there were still hundreds of millions of these things, and that was able to support 100 million Native Americans eating them.
Yeah.
So the idea that allowing the world to work exactly the way it's been working for hundreds of millions of years is a bad thing, and this is destroying the planet all of a sudden. Like you're going to have to tell me why. You're going to have to tell me why right now animals are a problem and they've never been before.
Well, I know right from the get-go, I loved your usage of the phrase species specific, and it ties into what you just said, and that really caught my attention when I first heard you speak. So I know personally, I didn't know why, but I know personally that I've benefited greatly over the years from what I call clean eating. And then people assume that means a vegetarian diet. And they're like, you don't eat meat. I'm like, are you kidding? I am like truly a carnivore. And so I
clean the bones. That's a clean diet I have.
What, pardon me?
I clean the bones. That's a clean.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I guess then that's another question. How do you reconcile your role as a physician with the pill popping? And as a neurosurgeon, do you prescribe? Do you talk to people about carnivore? Do you offer it as an alternative? I'm just curious because that must be, you must have so much like inner dialogue about that.
So when it comes up and it's pertinent, I don't feel that it's ethical not to discuss it. So having a problem that I think that proper nutrition can help, and that does come up, I do feel that it's important to do that. My role in the hospital, that's not always, possible just through massive time restrictions. And also, I don't want people to think that this is the department or the hospital recommending this, so I don't want to come across as if this is a general recommendation from the hospital, because there are my personal views. And so I say, listen, this is my own personal view, but I do think this is something that can help. Why don't you look at these resources and you do some looking into this, and you can make your own decisions. That's why I like the functional medicine practice that I also work in, because I can just go right into that. And yes, that's a major thing that I talk about with my patients. That's something that I've seen reverse untold amount of diseases. I'm always being amazed at the different things that I'm seeing or improved from just eating a proper diet. And so, yes, I do use this. I absolutely use this as one of the mainstays. It was one of the strongest tools I've ever seen. Like I said, we have so much ground to gain just by eating optimally. We don't need all the tips and tricks, and medications are great, some of them, for certain situations and emergency situations, but most of them now treat these chronic diseases, chronic situations where they're just a Band-Aid, and they're just covering up some sort of metabolic distress, like like insulin resistance. And so you're taking medications that lower insulin or increase insulin and lower insulin resistance, and can overcome these metabolic dysfunctions that you have. And do is eat right and they go away. So that's treating the underlying condition, and that's what doctors are supposed to do, and that's what most doctors want to do, and that's what they think they're doing. They just don't, until someone points it out to them. They don't realize that diabetes is not a metformin deficiency, right? Hypothyroidism is a thyroid deficiency. So that's something that you can replace if you lose your thyroid due to cancer or something. That's something you can replace. But you're not, or insulin, you lose the ability to make insulin, you can replace the insulin. So the idea is there, but then all of a sudden, you give this medication to treat that thing. But then we forget, like, we're not treating a deficiency here. Our bodies just aren't able to make, not able to make like metformin or something like that, or these blood pressure medications and things like that. Something's going wrong.
Yeah.
And this is a Band-Aid.
Right.
And so, I do use medications when and as they're, necessary and required. And,
Yeah.
in neurosurgery, it's, antibiotics, someone has an infection or you're covering them for surgery, or, pain relief, things like that. Those are the major ones.
Mhm.
And obviously, if someone comes in with medication, you sort of have to perpetuate that because they're in the hospital. And that's not always the best time to revamp their entire life. But no, I do try as much as possible to just use people's own health and restore their own health so that you can actually come off medications as opposed to going on more.
Yeah, I obviously from listening to you, I knew you were in that direction, but gosh, like what a conundrum, right? To have to be in that world. And then have you ever heard of not to be in the world, but to have to advocate for that? Have you ever heard of the blood typing diet?
No, yes, yes.
See, and I'm
Um,
a type O, so I always thought my love of meat was because I was a blood type O, but you're saying, not so much.
well, I'm A positive, so apparently I'm supposed to be a vegan,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, ask yourself this: does a lion's blood type change what it's supposed to eat? What about a dolphins or zebras or a giraffe or an emu?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not, right?
Probably
You
not.
know,
All right.
regardless of the blood type of a lion, you could take every single lion on Earth and you can feed them gazelle and asparagus. You're not going to find a single lion that does better on asparagus than gazelle.
Right.
And that's because lions are still lions, humans are still humans. So if you, so the blood type is one protein or a couple proteins on the surface of your red blood cells. Okay. And that's it. So you have a one protein or two protein difference on your red blood cells. And that's supposed to fundamentally change you as a species. That's supposed to fundamentally change your digestion, nutrients you need, what nutrients you don't need, if you're able to process fiber or not, if you're able to get everything you need from meat, or if you get everything from plants. It doesn't matter what blood type you are, you still need B12, right? So B12 doesn't exist in plants. And there are many other nutrients that don't exist in plants either that you have to get that only exist in meat. Doesn't matter what your blood type is. So that doesn't change your fundamental underlying nature. It doesn't change your species. If you have two animals, one is an herbivore and one is a carnivore, an obligate carnivore, those are two different species,
Right.
right? We're Homo sapiens sapiens. We're all the same species. And while we may have slight differences on what we're able to tolerate of suboptimal food, like people that have come from a background where their ancestors had
Okay.
agriculture.
Already made. I give up.
Okay. But that's the thing. We're all humans and
Right.
it's all the same. So, just because I do worse from lead exposure than you do doesn't mean lead's good for you. It just means it's less
Right.
bad, right?
Yes.
Maybe people that do, better, like Europeans do better with a Western diet than, Native Australians, Native Americans, where we get far more sick from eating based diet, going off their meat-based diet. So that's because they haven't had exposure to agriculture for 10,000 years. They've had a slight, 10,000 years is not that long, but it's a bit of time. And it's more than the Native Americans, Native Australians got. Something like Mesoamerica, they had it a bit for
Like
a
an
while.
adaptation is what you're saying.
Exactly. So we've had about 10,000 years to adapt. Native Americans, Native Australians have not. And so we can tolerate plant-based food better than Native Americans and Native Australians and other tribes that have only been eating meat. And so that's but that doesn't mean that's optimal for us. It just means it's less bad for us. So the same thing with the blood type diet. I have no idea if that confers. I think the argument is that more that blood type A happened sort of after agriculture, and so people were better off with plants. But there are Europeans that have their ancestors are came from agriculture and they're blood type O, like yourself. My mom's blood type O, my dad's blood type A. So is my mom supposed to be an herbivore? My dad's a carnivore, and or vice versa. And then we're just depending on the blood types of our parents. No, it depends on the species that you are.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Well, I know that you have like 300 plus hours of content on YouTube. Yeah, interviews and
Something like that. Yeah.
all of this information. Yeah. And so I highly, highly, highly recommend people go out and at this point at least have your curiosity piqued or tickled and go out and learn more and figure out what works for you. And I have to say, I remember, so I did try the blood typing diet, it's true, and with my
Mhm.
family. And I remember my son came to me, he was probably about 10 at the time, and he said, Mom, this is of all the things we've ever done, I felt the best on this one. Well, he was an O, or he is an O, I should say. So we were,
Mm.
eating a lot of upping his meat protein. So, who
Yeah,
knows?
good.
Yeah.
Well, well, I do know
So,
that meat. Yeah, I do know that meat is good for him.
right,
And he
right.
did feel better. So yeah, so it's good. But I mean, these things obviously you got lucky. You guys are type O, so you just happen to fall upon what's actually good for you, which is
Yeah,
good.
yeah, exactly. Well, and I've been introduced to so many amazing other people, speakers, carnivore advocates through your channel, like Kelly Hogan, Ken Berry, the Meat
Mm.
Mafia, Sean Baker, all these people. So thank you for opening all of that up to me and other people. And how can people find you? Anything else you want to say? Thank you so much for all the time you've donated to us today.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD. So CHAFFE. So F is in Frank. And my Instagram is the same. TikTok, which is horrible, is the same. And then I have a podcast just called The Plant Free MD, and that's on Apple and Spotify and everything else. And I have other and Twitter's Anthony underscore Chaffee, things like that. So there are others, but those are the main ones, and people can find others through that. And that's pretty much it. So if people want to watch my YouTube channel or listen to my podcast, that's where to get it. And that's where most of my content is. And I try to make everything available for free for people because I'm not this is not my day job. I make way more money in my day job, and so this is this is I do this because I think it's important. And I want this to get out there because like Dr. Becky said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the amount of benefit to people's lives that I've seen this give, I can't not spread this around. And it really bothers me that this has been hidden from people and that people have been very responsibly ruining their lives and dying early, and that their parents have had decades of ill health and an early death unnecessarily because they were listening to their doctor's advice. They were listening to the best advice. They were doing what they were told to do, and it cost them their lives. And that really bothers me. And the corruption infuriates me. And so we're not going to get at these guys. They're too well protected. They should be in jail. They should be in front of a whitewashed wall with a bandana and a cigarette. But that's not going to happen. And so what we need to do is we need to educate people and have them understand that this is a fraud and not to fall for it because they can only trick people if they don't know. And so that's why we need to get this out there. And that's why I want to get this out to as many people as possible. And that's why I try to grow my channel and get this out there, not because I don't have any supplements. I don't care.
Right, right.
Um, you don't need any of that stuff, right? You just need to be healthy and eat meat. And I just want this to get out to as many people as possible so that they can take this and they can take back control of their lives so that they don't need doctors, that they don't need me to come see me in the office and have me track their bloods and help them with their medical conditions, that they don't need surgeons and doctors and all these sorts of things, that they can just be healthy. I would really love it if we got back to old school medicine where we were dealing with basically five things: childbirth and delivery, pregnancy, childbirth and delivery, infant sort of infections, diseases, and infectious diseases, congenital and genetic abnormalities, traumas, injuries, and poisonings, toxic exposure. Right now, we have this sixth category of chronic disease that never existed before the 20th century.
Mhm.
Now it's 92% of all the medical expenditures. So this is massive. And what I think that is actually that fifth thing, that toxic exposure thing.
Right, right.
We have toxic exposure of a species inappropriate diet
Mhm.
and lack of species specific nutrition, namely we're eating too many plants that were not evolved and adapted to eat, and we're not eating enough meat, which is good for us. And so I want to get back to that. I want to get back to medicine of the patient population of 150 years ago with all the modern advances in technologies,
Mhm.
right? We can do so much more. It's helped
Right.
so many more people. We don't need as many doctors. We don't need as many hospitals. We don't need to spend so much money
Mhm.
on medical care because we won't be as sick. So that's what I want. And I'm hoping to get that through this grassroots movement, talking to people like yourself and doing my podcast and just doing the best I can to educate as many people as possible. And it's great. And it sort of has it sort of takes a life of its own, and more and more people see it. They try it. They have amazing health results. They pass that on to other people. They influence those other people and say, I want to try that. I want to get a piece of that. And then they do it. They have amazing results. They influence people around them, and the chain reaction goes
Yeah,
on. And
yeah,
that's happening,
yeah.
sort of hitting that critical mass of people that are really starting to go. So now
Mhm.
it's known, it's the carnivore diet. That was not a thing a few years ago. And no one knew what the hell that was. Now it's a house. Now people at least know what it is, at least know enough to talk trash about it, right?
Right.
If they're talking trash about it, they're talking about it,
Yeah,
right? They have to talk about it,
yeah.
and that's because it's known, and so that's the point. It was an old saying. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, right? And so we're in the fighting stage right now. They're fighting us. They tried really killing us. They couldn't really do that, and now they're sort of fighting us, saying, you can't do this, you're awful, you're horrible, you're attack, attack, attack. So that's good. That's a very good sign that we're gaining ground. And actually, that was some of the food companies. There was a group that sued for some of the minutes of this food company here in Australia, where they called Low Carb Down Under, and they sued for these minutes, and they found that the sugar, or that the cereal companies and processed food companies were actually really upset about the whole ketogenic diet movement, and they're like, this is costing us cereal sales, this is screwing us, we need to take this down. So who do we attack, who do we focus on? And one of them was Dr. Gary Fettke, and they named him by name. They're like, we need to target this guy, we need to get him deregistered, get his medical license taken away. And so they heavily fund and finance the Australian Dietetics Association. And so they put their little cronies to work. And the head of the Australian Dietetics Association called the CEO of Dr. Fettke's hospital in Tasmania and said, you need to fire this guy. You need to take this guy down. You need to shut him up.
Mm.
And they tried. And
Wow.
they tried to get the license taken away for recommending a diet that was curing his patients.
Mm.
It
That's
was
so wrong.
scientifically and evidence-based.
Mm.
So they are fighting us because we're actually having an impact.
Yeah.
And so that's good. And so that's a good sign. We just need to fight back harder. We need to get more and more and more people. And when there's enough people that know about this, cat's out of the bag.
Yeah.
They're done. And so I think we're well on the way to that. And hopefully we
Well,
do very soon.
it is such a steep hill because we have been so ingrained about eat your vegetables, A.
Yeah.
And then B, I lost my train of thought. B, oh, I was going to say, you didn't hear the intro, but what I said in the intro was you have a penchant for healing. And so, whatever way you can do that, whether it's by day as a neurosurgeon or by night as a podcaster, I see that as your end goal. And I'm very appreciative of, because quite frankly, I guess I needed permission to just eat meat. I did.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome, and encouraged to, and if you want to eat other things, they're more than welcome to. My main thing is just letting people understand this is our biological design. And if you want to eat outside of that, that's perfectly fine. I don't care if people smoke and drink. I just don't want them to smoke and drink because they think it's good for them.
Right. Being
Eat
aware.
vegetables. Yeah, exactly. If you want to eat vegetables, if you want to eat corn and soy and all these sorts of things, that's completely up to you. I have no grudge against you. I just want you to understand that meat has been improperly vilified, and that plants are actually not as good as we get told they are from the people selling us the plants and the plant.
Right. Well, I ordered Sally's book. I already read it, and the pictures in there with the little toothpicks that, when the microscopic view with the plant. I don't even know what I'm talking about here.
The oxalate crystals.
Yeah, exactly. The oxalate crystals are in the plant stem, and it's mind-boggling, and how we can only process like 100 to 250 milligrams, I guess, per day. And yet a handful of spinach is 500 milligrams. So anyway, we could be on here all day long. So I just want to thank you so much for your time today. And you so delivered as I thought you would. You're a wealth of knowledge. You have statistics left and right, and just truly an honor and a privilege to have you on here today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and it's lovely to meet you. Yeah. And I hope it went well. I hope people like it.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right. Well, until the next time, have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. You too.
After I interview someone, I really like to do a debrief. It helps me process the information that I heard and the takeaways I had. And a couple of you have commented that that you appreciate that as well. Well, I recorded a debrief after my interview with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. However, a few things have happened since then. I went back through the interview in the editing process and realized I missed all kinds of facts and figures. So that's one thing. The second thing is I still had some questions. So I reached out and asked a few of them and got an email response. So I thought I would re-record this debrief and also let you know I will put many links in the show notes. So go there if you would like more information. The first thing that I'll say is there's a video that I'm going to link in the show notes. And it was based on a talk Dr. Chaffee gave at a symposium. I think it was for metabolic health. And the title of it is Dr. Anthony Chaffee, Plants Are Trying to Kill You. Please go watch it. If your curiosity has been piqued at all, this is a 30-minute talk, super informative, and I just can't imagine it will make you stop and think. So why not challenge your thinking, right? So that's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, let's go to the responses that he gave me via email. One, I was asking him about plants as medicine, and basically he came back with, yeah, plants are great as medicine. However, he does think it's a better option to use pharmaceutical isolated ingredients because you want a specific amount of something special. For instance, digoxin, I think is the word, from the foxglove. And he says, you have no idea how much you're getting if it's too much or too little, and it's coming with a whole host of other defense chemicals that can cause even more harm. Best thing to do is just take the exact dose of the medicine that you need without anything else coming along with it. So there you go. I was asking him about lab work, and I assumed he got it done not because he needed to, but because it helped the cause. It helped him explain how healthy he was, because that's usually the issue people have with this kind of eating, right? So sure enough, he wrote that he very rarely does labs, but he does it to appease other people. And he recently converted a friend of his who is an endocrinologist and a functional medicine doctor for 40 years because he was curious what Anthony's blood work looked like. So he said that if you took 100,000 people off of the street and took all of their blood samples, hormones, nutrient levels, etc., that Anthony's, would be the number one without a shadow of a doubt. So that's pretty cool proof, validation, something like that. All right. The next question I asked him was regarding, it was regarding entertaining. With the holidays coming up, I just thought, gosh, how do you entertain when you're eating carnivore? So I wasn't sure if he entertained a lot. So anyway, I threw it out there and I was curious what he served and or accommodated the guests, right? And he said, yes, I do entertain, and it's always a steak night. I make better steaks than any restaurant I've ever been to, and my friends and colleagues say the same thing. If they want to eat anything else, they are welcome to bring it, but I don't feed my guests poison. When I read that, that literally made me laugh out loud. That was a good one. All right. And then the last question I asked him, I was kind of curious about his family, because it's one thing when you do something, a certain protocol, but when the rest of the family gets on board, I think it says something else. So I asked him about his extended family. His parents are carnivore. His two brothers are carnivore, and his two sisters are not necessarily carnivore, but they are absolutely certainly eating more meat than they had. His cousin and their family also eat more meat as well. And the cousin in particular dips in and out of keto and carnivore. So another cousin reversing autoimmune diseases by going carnivore as well. And I usually don't push this on family members. I just let them come to me if they have questions about it, and then I can help them as much as I can. So there you go. Okay, then a few of my takeaways, or maybe not burning thoughts, but thoughts. One is this idea of kilocalories and matter, and how we've been in this calorie mindset for so long. And he talked about eating fat is actually more efficient for your body versus carbs. And that explanation was really new to me, and I loved hearing it. That really made a lot of sense. So dig that. The second thing is the staggering statistic that he cited, which is that currently, which wasn't the case years ago, currently our 92% of our medical expenditure is based on chronic disease. That is very troubling and gross. So I don't know, something's not working. So maybe we can think differently about food. I mentioned in the podcast that I had headaches and how I healed them by paying attention to food. I also have had I have diabetes in my family and have had sugar issues myself, as well as thyroid issues, hypothyroidism, and Hashimoto's. All that to say, those things go away. The need for medication goes away, the cleaner I am. And for years and years and years, I have been doing heavy protein and greens. And there was still something missing. Like the more greens I ate, the more vegetables I ate, the more vegetables I ate, the more I started craving everything under the sun. And I'm constantly gaining weight, even with that kind of a diet. So going back to this really takes care of the sugar issues, the thyroid issues, and for sure takes care of the cravings and stabilizes weight as well as kind of reduces it. So love that part of it. I'm not surprised by this, but I just can't believe more people don't know this. Like, why isn't the cat out of the bag that the sugar companies in the past had paid off Harvard professors? Again, it's documented, it's published. And this idea of fat, that there's no correlation between saturated fat and strokes. Matter of fact, there's an inverse proportion. He mentioned that higher fat reduced stroke rates. So higher fat, fewer strokes. That's kind of huge, especially, I don't know about you, but a lot of people right now are having issues. All right, disease reversal in general, he threw out a challenge about, checking out forums and seeing people talk about their disease reversal. I think there's merit there. Thyroid I already talked about, related to myself. Oh, the other thing is not enough fat causing constipation. and that it isn't a fiber issue. I think a lot of people eat vegetables and fruit because they want to avoid constipation. So if the fat is high enough, and we've taken fat out of our diet, so then that makes sense that we need this other roughage to help us. So I'm rethinking it myself about adding fat back in versus fiber to help with bowels. Never thought I would say that on this podcast, but there you go. He also mentioned Dr. Sean O'Mara out of Minnesota, who I'll put his link in the show notes as well, who's talking about visceral fat directly related to metabolic health and how the best results came out of intensity with exercise, but also the carnivore diet he does with fermented vegetables. And again, please go watch the low carb down under video with Dr. Chaffee, Plants Are Trying to Kill You, at the talk he did. I believe he was in California when he did that. I'm not exactly positive. Thank you so much to Dr. Anthony Chaffee for, being on the podcast. He's really something, isn't he? He's really great. All that to say, what a fantastic guest, topic, and person. He's really a great guy. Real special to have him on this podcast. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did, or even a smidge, or your curiosity was piqued, or you're thinking differently. I hope all those things happen. So on that note, have a great day. You have been listening to the Charging Up Leadership podcast, and I am your host, Heidi Frye, charged up, plugged in, and sending you energy, light, and love. Find me at HeidiFrye.com. And don't forget to check out my book, The Light Switch, available on Amazon, in your local bookstores, or on my website. The Charging Up Leadership podcast is created, hosted, and produced by Heidi Frye. Theme music is by Yevchen Anoychenko from Pixabay.